Okay, guys, in this video, we're just going to do a very quick run through of just very basic soft tissue injuries. Before this video, you should have watched the fractures video, which talked through the skeletal injuries and how we treat those. Okay, so skeletal injuries are going to be breaks or fractures. As we talk about soft tissue injuries, though, these are anything that's going to any type of injury or damage that happens to the muscle or connective tissue, and usually it's going to have some impact on the surrounding tissue, which is probably skin or fat. Okay, but more often than not, it's going to be directly to the muscle or to the connective tissue. Okay, there's basically three that we're going to talk to. However, one of them has different grades, different severities of the injury, and we can classify those a little bit differently, okay? So make sure you have this in your notes, that soft tissue injuries are any injury that happened to the muscle or connective tissue, okay? So the first thing you need to know is a sprain. Now, in your joints, we talked about before this that you have pieces of connective tissue, tendons and ligaments, that are attaching the bones to the other bones or muscles to the bone to produce that movement, right? Now, when we have a sprain, this is an overstretching of the connective tissue in a joint. More often than not, this is going to happen to a ligament, okay? Now, we talked about the ligaments, how they're pretty, they're fibrous, and they're pretty rigid for the most part. There's not meant to be a lot of movement in those ligaments, because if they get real loose, or the term that exercise scientists use, lax, if they get real lax, then there's too much movement and there's too much mobility in that joint, and we don't want that, okay? So when we have that overstretching, like a rolled ankle, you might see like a sprained ankle, rolled ankle, okay? You're going to see swelling, and that's inflammation. And what we'll talk about later is inflammation is your body's natural way to heal itself. However, it's not a very efficient process. So we try to kind of, for lack of a better word, skip that process and make it go faster. Obviously, there's going to be some pain. Pain is your body's way to tell you that something is wrong, okay? There's probably going to be, depending on how severe it is, probably going to be some discoloration, which would be like bruising. And then there's going to be stiffness, or sometimes you might see stiffness written as immobility, which means like you can't use it. There's so much bruising or so much swelling that you can't use it. Okay. Now you're not going to understand. You're not going to understand this part yet, but I just want you to put it in your notes so you know when you come back to it later, you know that we treat sprains with the Rice method. Now, if you boil all this down, what you need to remember is sprains happen in the joint. Okay. Now, the next type of soft tissue injury that we're going to talk about is a strain. Now, this is an overstretching of the muscle tissue. And right here, that overstretching means it's a force that we've applied to the length of the muscle. Okay. Now, we kind of already talked about this, but we haven't gone into great detail. So your muscle fibers sit in there, and they're like big rubber bands, basically. Okay, and they're going to expand and kind of come back on each other and expand, and that's how we create muscle movement. Now, sometimes we might overwork that muscle to the point of injury or an overstretching, where we stretch those rubber bands too tight. Now, in just a basic strain, we've just stretched it a little too far. That's basically it. We've just stretched it a little too far. Okay, and this little diagram will show you that swelling or inflammation that happens in the muscle tissue. Basically, when we stretch them too far, what happens is we're breaking the blood vessels that are taking the oxygen and nutrients to the muscle tissue, and they start to kind of bleed out a little bit. That's why you might see some of that discoloration, which we'll talk about later. Again, strains are treated with the Rice method. Now, I don't want you to worry about putting this in your notes. However, I want to explain this to you. We have three variations of a muscle strain. Okay, so there's grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. This grade 1 is just a basic muscle strain, which we just explained to you. When we get to, hold on, I want to back up here just a second. A lot of times you might say, or your parents might say, or you might hear somebody say, I pulled a muscle. Well, they actually probably didn't pull a muscle. It's pretty hard to actually pull a muscle. What they're referring to is a strain. They've strained their muscle. However, if we get to a grade 2 strain, this probably is a pull. Okay, now in a grade 2 strain, what we've done is we've taken that muscle and we've stretched it about as far as it can go. And just like if you were to stretch a rubber band as far as it can go, what's going to happen to it is it's going to come back on itself, right? That's what happens. So in this grade 2, it has stretched to the point where it's come back on itself, and it's actually torn a little bit of the muscle tissue, okay? So it's torn a little bit of it, all right? Now, when this happens, a pulled muscle or a grade 2 strain is going to be black and blue. So you're going to be bruised from the top of the muscle to the bottom of the muscle. So if it was from in my hamstring, it would be from my butt to my knee. It would be black and blue. Now, if you come out and you get injured and your whole hamstring is black and blue and you can't walk on it, then you can say you pulled a muscle. Okay? Now, we have this grade 3 here. Now, this is very, very severe, and a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot of times. Some of the times, these grade 3 strains require some surgery to go back and repair it. Basically, what's happened is we have stretched this muscle to the point of it's just torn or it's ripped. Okay, and there's nothing you're not able to use it at all. So that's a lot of times it's going to be some definite medical treatment there. Okay. So the last soft tissue injury that you need to have in your notes is something called a contusion, and that's just the medical way to say bruising. It's a pooling of soft tissue in the injury. Okay. Now, why that happens is when we get injured or when we injure those soft tissues, those blood vessels are going to burst or rip open. That's not a great way to say it, but they're gonna break, and that blood has to go somewhere. So before the blood vessel shuts itself off, and that kind of pools in the soft tissue. Now, bruising is probably on the second or third day going to look like this, black and blue, right? We call that black and blue or a purple color. As it starts to change color, that is when healing starts to happen. So that's a good thing, okay? Now, make sure that you have this stuff in your notes. From here, you're going to move on and start to talk about the Rice method and how we treat these soft tissue injuries, okay?